The moment he saw her behind the wheel, he decided she didn't belong there. The late afternoon sun cast long golden shadows across the streets of Oakwood Heights, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in the state. Luxury homes stood behind iron gates, perfectly trimmed hedges lined the sidewalks, and expensive vehicles glided through the quiet streets as residents returned home from another ordinary day. Among them was Dr. Naomi Carter. Sitting behind the wheel of a black Rolls-Royce Ghost, Naomi drove with calm focus, her hands resting lightly on the steering wheel as she navigated the familiar roads. At 34 years old, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years earning every achievement she possessed. Her tailored navy blazer hung neatly over her shoulders, and a hospital identification badge rested inside her handbag on the passenger seat. The dashboard clock displayed 4:17 p.m. She glanced at it briefly before returning her attention to the road. Time mattered today. More than usual. Across the city, a 12-year-old boy was preparing for a complex medical procedure scheduled for that evening. Naomi had spent weeks studying every detail of the case. Families were waiting. Nurses were preparing. Specialists were assembling. Every minute counted. But at that moment, she was simply another driver heading toward the hospital. At least that was how it should have been. Less than a quarter mile behind her, Officer Ryan Mitchell sat inside his patrol vehicle monitoring traffic. He had worked the area for years and believed he knew exactly who belonged in neighborhoods like this and who did not. As the Rolls-Royce passed through an intersection, his eyes immediately locked onto it. His attention lingered. Then he noticed the woman driving. Something changed in his expression. He leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes as if searching for a reason to justify the suspicion already forming in his mind. The expensive car. The prestigious neighborhood. The successful appearance. None of it fit the story he had instantly created in his head. He followed her for nearly 2 blocks. Naomi remained unaware. Soft jazz played through her speakers while she mentally reviewed patient notes from memory. She had done this thousands of times. Focus. Preparation. Discipline. The habits that had carried her from a modest childhood to becoming one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in the region. Behind her, Ryan continued watching. Looking. Judging. Waiting. Finally, his hand reached toward the control panel. Red and blue lights exploded across the afternoon street. Naomi looked into her rearview mirror and blinked in surprise. The flashing lights reflected across the polished surface of her vehicle. For a moment she assumed the officer intended to pass her. But the lights remained. The siren chirped once. Then again. She exhaled slowly and guided the Rolls-Royce toward the curb. Nearby pedestrians turned their heads. Drivers slowed down. Curtains shifted inside nearby homes. People watched. Naomi checked the time again. 4:21 p.m. 4 minutes lost. She turned off the engine and waited patiently, unaware that this simple traffic stop was about to become something much larger. Officer Ryan Mitchell stepped out of his cruiser and approached the driver's side window. His expression was already set. His assumptions already made. And before Naomi Carter spoke a single word, before he asked a single question, before he knew anything about the woman sitting inside that luxury car, he had already decided exactly who he thought she was. Officer Ryan Mitchell stopped beside the driver's window and looked down at Naomi with an expression that felt less like curiosity and more like judgment. Naomi lowered the window and offered a polite smile. "Good afternoon, officer." Her voice was calm, professional, and measured. Ryan did not return the greeting. His eyes moved across the interior of the Rolls-Royce before settling back on her face. License and registration. Naomi nodded and reached carefully into her handbag. She handed over the documents without hesitation. Ryan glanced at them briefly. "Dr. Naomi Carter?" he asked. "Yes, sir." He looked at the license again. "This vehicle belongs to you?" Naomi answered simply. "Yes, it does." Ryan stared at her for a moment longer than necessary. "That Is a very expensive car. Naomi remained composed. It is. The officer folded his arms. What exactly do you do for a living? Naomi noticed several people slowing down on the sidewalk nearby. A delivery driver parked across the street appeared to be watching as well. She could feel attention gathering around them. I am a physician, she replied. Ryan raised an eyebrow. A physician. The way he repeated the word carried a hint of disbelief. What kind? Cardiac surgeon. Ryan looked unconvinced. He glanced back at the registration again and then at the vehicle. Step out of the car for a moment. Naomi checked the clock on the dashboard. 4:23 p.m. Another 2 minutes gone. She stepped out calmly and stood beside the vehicle. The warm afternoon breeze moved through the trees overhead. Ryan slowly walked around the Rolls-Royce, inspecting it from every angle. Naomi waited patiently. Do you know why I stopped you? He finally asked. No, sir. You seemed nervous. Naomi blinked. I was driving to work. You also slowed down when you saw my patrol vehicle. Naomi answered honestly. Most drivers do. Ryan did not seem satisfied. He continued asking questions. Where was she coming from? Where was she going? How long had she owned the vehicle? Had anyone else driven it recently? Each answer Naomi provided was straightforward and consistent. Yet the questions continued. Her phone suddenly lit up inside the vehicle. A call appeared on the screen. St. Vincent Medical Center. Naomi felt a small knot form in her stomach. She knew exactly why they were calling. The surgery team was likely finalizing preparations. She took a small step toward the car. Officer, would it be possible for me to answer that call? It is work-related. Ryan looked at the phone but shook his head. Not yet. The call ended. Seconds later another notification appeared. Then a text message. Then another. Naomi could not read the contents from where she stood, but she already understood the urgency. Across the city, an operating room was being prepared. Doctors were coordinating schedules. Nurses were checking equipment. A young patient and his family were waiting. Yet here she stood on the side of a quiet street while a stranger searched for reasons to justify suspicions he had formed before speaking a single word to her. Ryan handed back her license but kept studying her face. You expect me to believe everything checks out perfectly? Naomi met his gaze without anger. I am simply telling you the truth, officer. For a brief moment silence settled between them. Then her phone began ringing again. The phone continued ringing inside the Rolls-Royce, the bright screen illuminating through the windshield before the call finally disappeared. Only a few seconds passed before another call arrived. Then another. Naomi recognized the number immediately. St. Vincent Medical Center. The pattern alone told her everything she needed to know. Something had changed. Something important. She remained calm on the outside, but years of experience had taught her how quickly circumstances could shift inside a hospital. Every minute mattered. Every delay had consequences. Officer Ryan Mitchell glanced toward the vehicle and frowned. Popular day? He asked. Naomi answered honestly. I am expected somewhere important. Ryan let out a short breath. Everybody says that when they are in a hurry. Nearby, more people had begun paying attention. A landscaping crew working across the street slowed their activity. 2 residents walking their dogs stopped near the corner. Someone sitting inside a parked vehicle appeared to be recording the interaction through a phone held discreetly against the steering wheel. The traffic stop had become a public scene. Naomi noticed the attention but refused to let it affect her. She stood with quiet dignity, her posture straight, her expression composed. She had spent her entire life learning how to remain calm when others expected her to react. Ryan continued examining the vehicle. He peered through the windows, circled around the rear bumper, and returned to the driver's side. You said you are a cardiac surgeon. Yes. At St. Vincent? Yes. Interesting. His tone suggested he did not find it interesting at all. He looked back toward the luxury homes surrounding them. Not many surgeons drive cars like this. Naomi almost smiled. Some do. Ryan folded his arms again. Must be nice. The comment hung in the air. Naomi chose not to respond. Another call appeared on her phone. This time the caller identification displayed the hospital's executive office. Even from several feet away she could read the words on the screen. Her heart sank slightly. Hospital administrators rarely called repeatedly unless something urgent was happening. She took a slow breath. Officer, I truly need to answer that call. Ryan looked at the screen and then back at her. You can answer calls after we finish here. Naomi glanced at the dashboard clock through the windshield. 4:28 p.m. 11 minutes since the lights first appeared behind her. 11 minutes that could not be recovered. Across town, a family sat in a waiting room hoping for good news. Doctors reviewed charts. Nurses prepared equipment. Somewhere inside that hospital, people were checking the clock just as often as she was. A sudden text notification appeared. Then another. Then a third. The messages stacked one after another across the screen. Urgent. Please call. Where are you? The words were visible even from outside the vehicle. One of the nearby onlookers noticed them too. Ryan followed the person's gaze toward the phone but remained unmoved. You seem nervous, he said again. Naomi looked directly at him. No, officer. I am concerned. About what? For the first time, there was a slight pause before she answered. About people who are depending on me. Ryan studied her face as if searching for deception. Instead, all he found was sincerity. Yet somehow that seemed to irritate him even more. The phone began ringing again. This time it did not stop. And for the first time since the traffic stop began, Naomi had the unmistakable feeling that whatever was happening at the hospital was becoming far more serious than anyone standing on that quiet suburban street could possibly imagine. At 4:31 p.m., the atmosphere on the quiet street felt completely different from when the traffic stop had begun. What had started as a routine interruption had slowly transformed into something larger, something that neither Officer Ryan Mitchell nor the small crowd gathering nearby fully understood. Naomi stood beside her vehicle, her attention drifting repeatedly toward the phone inside the Rolls-Royce as call after call continued to arrive. The screen lit up again. This time the caller identification displayed the name of the hospital's chief executive officer. Several nearby observers exchanged glances. Even they could tell the calls were not ordinary. Naomi took a slow breath and tried once more. Officer, I understand you have a job to do. But there are people waiting for me right now. I need to answer that call. Ryan looked toward the vehicle and then back at her. You seem awfully determined to leave. Naomi kept her voice calm. I am determined to get to work. The answer seemed to frustrate him. He stepped toward the vehicle and glanced through the window. The phone stopped ringing. Seconds later another message appeared. Then another. Then another. The notifications stacked across the screen so quickly that they nearly covered the entire display. Nearby, one of the residents watching from the sidewalk quietly shook his head. Something about the situation no longer felt right. Across the city, inside St. Vincent Medical Center, activity had reached an entirely different level. Nurses moved quickly through brightly lit hallways. Specialists checked equipment. Administrators made phone calls. A surgical team that had spent weeks preparing for a highly complex procedure now found itself waiting for the one person whose absence could delay everything. In a private family waiting area, a 12-year-old boy sat surrounded by worried relatives. He tried to appear brave, but uncertainty filled the room. His parents answered questions from medical staff while repeatedly asking the same question themselves. Had anyone reached Dr. Naomi Carter? No one had an answer yet. Back on the roadside, Ryan finally handed Naomi her registration. For a brief moment she thought the encounter might finally be ending. But instead of stepping away, he continued asking questions. Questions about her schedule. Questions about her destination. Questions about her vehicle. Questions that had little to do with the reason he had originally stopped her. Naomi answered every one of them respectfully. She did not raise her voice. She did not show anger. Yet with every passing minute, the concern behind her eyes became harder to hide. Imagine standing there knowing that somewhere across town people were depending on you, knowing that every tick of the clock mattered, and realizing there was nothing you could do except wait. The dashboard clock now read 4:34 p.m. 17 minutes had passed. The late afternoon sun had begun sinking lower behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. Then Naomi's phone lit up once again. But this call was different. The name on the screen caused her expression to change for the first time that day. She stared at it silently. Even from several feet away, Ryan could see that this was not another routine call. Neither of them realized that the person trying to reach her at that exact moment was connected to a revelation that would soon change everything. Naomi stared at the name glowing on the screen. Commissioner David Mitchell. For the first time since the traffic stop began, genuine surprise crossed her face. The call continued ringing. Officer Ryan Mitchell noticed the change immediately. "You know the commissioner?" he asked. Naomi looked at him calmly. "I have spoken with him before." The answer only deepened his suspicion. He glanced toward the phone again as the call finally ended. Seconds later a voicemail notification appeared, followed almost immediately by another incoming call from the same number. Around them, the small crowd had grown larger. People lingered on sidewalks. A few watched from parked vehicles. The entire scene carried the uncomfortable feeling of something that had gone on far longer than it should have. Ryan folded his arms. "Why would the police commissioner be calling you?" Naomi chose her words carefully. "Because his family knows me." Ryan gave a skeptical laugh. "That is convenient." Naomi did not respond. She had spent too many years overcoming assumptions to waste energy arguing with them. Instead, her attention drifted once more toward the phone. The hospital messages continued arriving. "Urgent update. Please contact surgical team. ETA requested." Her concern deepened. Across the city, the situation inside St. Vincent Medical Center was becoming increasingly tense. Doctors moved quickly between consultation rooms. Administrators checked their phones repeatedly. Nurses exchanged worried looks. The patient scheduled for surgery that evening was no ordinary case. The procedure required one of the most specialized cardiac surgeons in the state. There was no easy replacement. There was no backup waiting nearby. There was only Dr. Naomi Carter. In a private waiting room, Commissioner David Mitchell stood beside his son and daughter-in-law. His 12-year-old grandson, Ethan, sat quietly holding a blanket while medical staff completed final preparations. David had built a career projecting confidence under pressure, but today was different. Today he was not a commissioner. He was a grandfather. He glanced toward his phone again. Still no answer. "Try her again," his son said anxiously. David nodded and pressed the call button once more. Back on the roadside, Naomi's phone lit up yet again. This time Ryan could clearly see the caller identification. Commissioner David Mitchell. The same name. The same number. Repeatedly. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Naomi looked toward him. "Officer, may I answer now?" Ryan hesitated. The confidence he had displayed earlier seemed slightly weaker than before. "Why is he calling you?" Naomi took a slow breath. "Because his grandson is waiting for me." Silence settled over the street. Even the nearby spectators appeared to stop moving. Ryan stared at her. "What are you talking about?" Naomi met his eyes. "I am scheduled to perform Ethan Mitchell's surgery this evening." The words hung in the air. Ryan's expression changed instantly. Not because he fully understood the situation yet, but because for the first time he realized there might be an explanation he had never considered. The phone continued ringing between them. And somewhere across the city, an anxious grandfather had no idea that the person he desperately needed to reach was standing on the side of a suburban road, still waiting for permission to answer his call. Ryan Mitchell felt the weight of Naomi's words settle over the street. For nearly a minute neither of them spoke. The repeated ringing of the phone seemed louder now, cutting through the quiet neighborhood like a warning that time was running out. Ryan looked at the screen again. Commissioner David Mitchell. The call ended. Then immediately started again. His throat tightened. Across his career he had handled countless traffic stops, but suddenly this one felt different. Very different. Naomi remained calm. She did not look angry. She did not look triumphant. If anything, she looked worried. Not for herself. For someone else. You are saying Ethan Mitchell is your patient? Ryan finally asked. Yes, Naomi answered. I have been working with his medical team for weeks. Ryan stared at her, searching for signs of exaggeration. He found none. Everything about her expression reflected the same quiet sincerity she had shown since the beginning. Before he could respond, a black SUV turned onto the street and stopped several yards away. Two hospital administrators stepped out quickly. One of them held a phone against his ear while scanning the area. The moment he spotted Naomi, relief flooded across his face. Dr. Carter, he called out. Thank goodness. Several onlookers exchanged surprised glances. The administrator approached rapidly. We have been trying to reach you everywhere. The surgical team is waiting. Ryan stepped aside as the man continued speaking. The family is asking for updates every few minutes. The hospital has been searching for you for almost half an hour. Naomi nodded. I know. I have been unable to answer. The administrator finally noticed Ryan standing nearby. His expression shifted from relief to confusion. Officer, is there a problem? Ryan opened his mouth but struggled to find an answer that sounded reasonable. Around them, the small crowd had become completely silent. The pieces were beginning to come together. The luxury car. The hospital calls. The commissioner. The urgency. Everything Ryan had dismissed was now standing directly in front of him. Naomi's phone rang again. This time she looked toward Ryan before reaching for it. For the first time since the encounter began, he simply nodded. Go ahead. Naomi answered immediately. Commissioner Mitchell. Even standing several feet away, Ryan could hear the concern in the older man's voice. Naomi listened carefully, then spoke with reassuring calm. I am on my way now. Please tell Ethan I will be there soon. When the call ended, she lowered the phone and took a slow breath. The dashboard clock displayed 4:42 p.m. 25 minutes had disappeared. 25 minutes that could never be returned. Ryan looked down at the pavement. The certainty he had carried at the beginning of the stop was gone. In its place was an uncomfortable realization. Every assumption he had made about Naomi had been wrong. Not because of anything she said. Not because of anything she did. But because he had decided who she was before giving her the chance to show him. And as the hospital administrators prepared to leave with Naomi, another realization began forming in Ryan's mind. The commissioner still did not know exactly why his grandson's surgeon had been delayed. But sooner or later, he would. The drive to St. Vincent Medical Center felt shorter than it should have. Perhaps because every person inside the vehicle understood the importance of what waited at the other end. Naomi sat quietly in the back seat of the hospital administrator's SUV reviewing information on a tablet while the city moved past the windows in a blur of evening light. She did not complain about the delay. She did not dwell on what had happened. Her focus remained exactly where it had always been. On her patient. Meanwhile, Officer Ryan Mitchell remained standing on the side of the road long after the vehicles disappeared from view. The crowd slowly dispersed. Conversations lingered. A few people shook their heads before walking away. Ryan returned to his patrol car, but the confidence that had defined his afternoon was gone. 20 minutes later, inside St. Vincent Medical Center, Naomi moved through the hospital corridors with calm determination. Nurses greeted her with visible relief. Members of the surgical team immediately gathered around her. Questions were answered. Updates were exchanged. Preparations resumed. The entire floor seemed to breathe again. In a nearby waiting room, Commissioner David Mitchell stood as Naomi entered. The older man's face showed the strain of a grandfather who had spent the afternoon fearing the worst. "Dr. Carter," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." Naomi shook his hand warmly. "I promised Ethan I would be here." David nodded. "He has been asking about you all afternoon." Naomi smiled. "Then I should not keep him waiting." Before she could leave, David hesitated. "There is one thing I still do not understand. Why was nobody able to reach you?" The room grew quiet. Hospital administrators exchanged brief glances. Naomi could have avoided the question. She could have offered a simple explanation and moved on. Instead, she answered honestly. "I was delayed during a traffic stop." David frowned. "For that long?" Naomi nodded. "Unfortunately, yes." Something in her tone caught his attention. It was not anger. It was not bitterness. It was simply truth. One of the administrators quietly explained what had happened. The repeated calls. The delay. The roadside questioning. The missed attempts to contact her. David listened without interruption. As the details unfolded, the color slowly drained from his face. "Who was the officer?" he finally asked. The room remained silent for a moment. Then the administrator answered. "Ryan Mitchell." The commissioner closed his eyes. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The realization settled heavily over the room. His own son. The same son who had unknowingly delayed the surgeon responsible for helping his grandson. David looked down at the floor. Years of leadership had taught him many lessons about accountability, but this moment felt deeply personal. When he finally looked up again, his voice was quiet. "Did he know who you were?" Naomi thought about the question. Then she answered with the same grace she had shown all day. "No. He only knew who he thought I was." The words lingered in the room long after they were spoken. Because everyone understood the difference. One was based on facts. The other was based on assumptions. And assumptions had nearly cost precious time that could never be replaced. The hours that followed were filled with the kind of tension that no amount of training could completely erase. Inside the surgical wing, teams moved with quiet focus while families waited and hoped. Naomi dedicated herself fully to the work ahead, setting aside everything that had happened on the roadside. The delay, the assumptions, the frustration, none of it mattered now. A young boy was depending on her. That was where her attention belonged. Outside the operating area, Commissioner David Mitchell sat alone for a long time. The sounds of the hospital drifted around him. Nurses walked past carrying charts. Families whispered to one another. Televisions displayed muted news broadcasts. Yet his thoughts remained fixed on a single reality. The person who had shown the greatest professionalism that day was the same person who had been treated with the least trust. Several hours later, a hospital representative finally emerged with an update. Relief spread through the waiting area. Family members embraced one another. Shoulders relaxed. Tears gave way to grateful smiles. David closed his eyes and quietly thanked God. The weight he had been carrying all day finally began to lift. Not long afterward, Naomi entered the family waiting area. She looked exhausted but composed. The room immediately stood. Ethan's parents thanked her repeatedly. David approached more slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then the commissioner extended his hand. "Dr. Carter, there are not enough words for what you have done for our family today. Naomi accepted the handshake with a gentle smile. Ethan was brave. He made my job easier. David shook his head. Most people would have arrived angry after what happened. Naomi looked toward the floor briefly before answering. Children should never carry the consequences of mistakes made by adults. The word struck everyone in the room. Because they knew she was right. She could have focused on herself. She could have held on to resentment. Instead, she had chosen responsibility. Compassion. Professionalism. The very qualities people should have recognized from the beginning. The following morning, an internal review was already underway. Body camera footage was examined. Dispatch records were reviewed. Witness statements were collected. Every minute of the encounter was reconstructed. The findings painted a troubling picture. Not of criminal intent. Not of corruption. But of something more common and often more difficult to confront. Assumptions. Assumptions that influenced decisions. Assumptions that extended a routine stop far beyond what was reasonable. Assumptions that affected how one person was viewed before she ever had a chance to speak. Ryan Mitchell sat through every review meeting. Every report. Every conversation. With each passing hour, the reality became harder to avoid. The evidence did not show who Naomi had claimed to be. It showed who she actually was. A respected surgeon. A trusted leader. A woman who had spent decades earning her place through discipline and sacrifice. And most painful of all, it showed how completely wrong his first impression had been. By the end of the week, the entire department had heard the story. Not because of rumors. Because of facts. And facts have a way of speaking louder than assumptions ever can. 3 weeks later, life had largely returned to normal at St. Vincent Medical Center. Patients filled waiting rooms. Doctors moved through hallways carrying charts and tablets. The rhythm of the hospital continued as it always had. Yet for many people, the events of that afternoon remained impossible to forget. Ethan Mitchell was recovering well. Each day brought new progress. His family celebrated small victories that once seemed uncertain. A short walk down a hallway. A stronger smile. More energy than the day before. For Commissioner David Mitchell, every improvement felt like a gift. One afternoon, he visited the hospital with Ethan for a follow-up appointment. As they entered the cardiac wing, Ethan spotted Naomi speaking with a group of nurses. His face immediately brightened. "Dr. Carter," he called. Naomi turned and smiled. "Look at you. You seem stronger every time I see you." Ethan grinned proudly. "That is because I listened to everything you told me." David watched the interaction quietly. The admiration in his grandson's eyes was impossible to miss. To Ethan, Naomi was not a headline, a title, or a controversy. She was simply the person who had helped him when he needed it most. Later that afternoon, after Ethan's appointment concluded, David asked Naomi if he could speak with her privately. They sat near a large window overlooking the city skyline. Sunlight reflected across the glass buildings in the distance while traffic moved steadily below. For a moment neither spoke. Then David finally broke the silence. "I owe you an apology." Naomi looked at him calmly. "Commissioner, you have nothing to apologize for." "Maybe not personally," he said. "But leadership carries responsibility. What happened should never have happened." Naomi nodded thoughtfully. "The important thing is what people learn from it." David looked out the window. "My son learned a difficult lesson." "Sometimes difficult lessons become important ones," Naomi replied. The commissioner smiled faintly. "You know, after all of this, people keep asking me why you never seemed angry." Naomi considered the question carefully. "Because anger would not have helped Ethan. It would not have helped your family. And it would not have changed the truth." David lowered his eyes. The simplicity of her answer carried more weight than any speech ever could. Weeks earlier, assumptions had shaped an entire encounter. Yet in the end, facts had spoken louder. Character had spoken louder. Dignity had spoken louder. As Naomi prepared to leave, David stood and extended his hand once more. "Thank you, Dr. Carter." She shook it warmly. "Take care of Ethan." Then she walked back toward the hospital corridors where more patients waited and more lives depended on her skill. David remained by the window for several moments after she left. Watching. Thinking. Understanding. Because the greatest lesson from that day was never about a luxury car, a traffic stop, or even a misunderstanding. It was about how quickly people can judge what they do not understand. He had seen a woman who carried herself with grace when she had every reason not to. A woman who chose responsibility over resentment. Compassion over pride. And as the sun slowly disappeared beyond the city skyline, one truth remained impossible to ignore. He saw a suspect. She saw a patient. That is why only one of them truly understood what service meant.